The morning rush at Chicago O'Hare Airport was nothing unusual. Thousands of travelers hurried through the terminals, dragging suitcases and checking their phones for gate information. Among them was Lisa Chen, a 31-year-old woman who looked tired but determined as she navigated through the crowded airport. Lisa wasn't traveling alone today. In her arms, she carried her 4-month-old daughter, Mia, who had been fussy all morning. The baby's soft cries echoed through the terminal as Lisa tried to juggle a heavy diaper bag, her purse, and a small carry-on suitcase. Her husband had offered to drive them to the airport, but his business meeting in Miami had started 2 days earlier, and she needed to join him for an important company event. She wore comfortable clothes for the long flight ahead, dark jeans, white sneakers, and a soft gray hoodie that made it easy to nurse the baby if needed. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she had barely had time to put on makeup before leaving home. To anyone watching, she looked like any other tired mother trying to manage air travel with a small child. The flight to Miami was on Cloudwing Airlines, a carrier that had grown rapidly over the past decade. Lisa had flown with them many times before, though usually for work trips without the baby. Today felt different. Everything took longer when traveling with an infant, from getting through security to finding the right gate. As she approached Gate 15, Lisa felt relieved to see that boarding for first class had already begun. Her husband had insisted on upgrading their tickets, knowing how difficult it would be to manage the baby in economy class. The extra space and priority boarding would make the journey much easier for both her and Mia. The gate agent smiled warmly as Lisa approached with her boarding pass. "Have a wonderful flight," the woman said, barely glancing at the ticket before waving them through. Lisa appreciated the kindness, especially since Mia had started crying again, despite her best efforts to keep her calm. Walking down the jet bridge, Lisa could hear other passengers behind her discussing their travel plans. Some were heading to Miami for vacation, others for business. The familiar sounds of airport life, rolling suitcases, muffled announcements, and conversations in multiple languages, created a background noise that somehow made Mia cry even louder. Once on the plane, Lisa looked for her seat number in the first-class section. The cabin was spacious and elegant with wide leather seats and plenty of legroom. She found her assigned seat and began the careful process of getting settled with a baby and multiple bags. Other first-class passengers were already seated, most of them dressed in business attire or expensive casual clothes. Lisa noticed a few curious glances in her direction, particularly from an older gentleman reading a financial newspaper and a well-dressed woman typing on her laptop. She tried not to feel self-conscious about her appearance, reminding herself that she had every right to be there. The flight attendant working the first-class section was a woman in her mid-30s named Jennifer Walsh. Jennifer had been with Cloudwing Airlines for 7 years and took pride in maintaining high standards of service. She had worked her way up from economy class and knew the importance of keeping first-class passengers happy. When Jennifer first noticed Lisa settling into seat 3A, her eyebrows rose slightly. The young woman with the crying baby didn't match the typical profile of their first-class travelers. Most passengers in this section were business executives, wealthy retirees, or celebrities. They usually dressed expensively and carried designer luggage. Jennifer watched as Lisa struggled to fit her diaper bag in the overhead compartment while holding the baby. The bag was clearly overstuffed with baby supplies, and Lisa was having trouble lifting it high enough. Instead of immediately offering help, Jennifer found herself wondering if there had been some kind of mistake with the seating. She had seen it happen before, passengers accidentally ending up in the wrong section due to gate agent errors or confusion with connecting flights. Usually, these situations were resolved quickly and politely. Jennifer decided to approach and check the situation before other passengers started complaining about the noise. "Excuse me," Jennifer said, walking over to Lisa's seat with a professional smile. "I just wanted to make sure you're in the right spot. Could I see your boarding pass?" Lisa looked up, slightly surprised by the request. She had already shown her ticket to the gate agent and thought everything was in order. "Of course," she said, reaching into her purse while trying to keep Mia from crying too loudly. "Here it is." Jennifer took the boarding pass and examined it carefully. The ticket clearly showed seat 3A in first class, with Lisa's name printed correctly. However, something about the situation still felt off to Jennifer. She had developed what she thought was a good sense for spotting passengers who didn't belong in premium sections. "This shows first class," Jennifer said slowly. "But are you sure this is your ticket?" Sometimes the gate agents make mistakes, especially during busy travel days. Lisa felt a wave of confusion and slight embarrassment. "Yes, I'm sure my husband booked the tickets for us. Is there a problem?" The question hung in the air as other passengers began to notice the conversation. Mia's crying seemed to get louder, as if she could sense the tension building around them. Lisa rocked her gently, trying to calm her down while wondering why a simple seat check was becoming so complicated. Jennifer felt caught between her instincts and the evidence in front of her. The boarding pass was legitimate, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Maybe the ticket had been purchased with a stolen credit card, or perhaps there was some other explanation for why this young mother was in first class. "Well," Jennifer said, her tone becoming slightly more formal, "I'll need to verify this with the gate agent. Sometimes there are issues with upgrade confirmations that don't show up until we're ready to take off." Lisa felt her heart sink. She was already exhausted from getting up early with the baby, dealing with airport security and managing all their luggage. The last thing she needed was a seating dispute that would delay everyone and draw more attention to herself. "I can call my husband if that would help," Lisa offered. "He has all the confirmation numbers and booking details." "That won't be necessary right now," Jennifer replied quickly. "Let me just check with the captain about the passenger manifest. I'll be right back." As Jennifer walked toward the cockpit, Lisa noticed that several other passengers were watching the exchange with interest. Some looked sympathetic, understanding how stressful air travel could be with a small child. Others appeared annoyed, as if they were already anticipating problems with their flight. The businessman with the newspaper lowered it slightly and glanced at Lisa with a questioning expression. The woman with the laptop had stopped typing and was openly staring. Lisa felt increasingly uncomfortable but tried to focus on keeping Mia calm. She wondered if she should have dressed differently for the flight. Maybe if she had worn a business suit or carried a designer handbag, there wouldn't be any questions about her presence in first class. The thought made her feel frustrated and sad at the same time. As minutes passed and Jennifer didn't return, Lisa began to worry that this simple misunderstanding was about to become something much bigger. She had no idea that her husband's position with the airline would soon turn this awkward moment into a situation that would change everything for everyone involved. Jennifer returned from the cockpit 10 minutes later, but her expression had hardened. She had spoken with the head flight attendant and the gate supervisor over the radio, and while they couldn't find any obvious problems with Lisa's ticket, Jennifer's suspicions had only grown stronger. During those 10 minutes, other passengers had continued boarding the plane. The first-class section was now nearly full, and Lisa could feel eyes on her from every direction. Mia had finally stopped crying and fallen asleep in her arms, but the temporary peace only seemed to make the awkward situation more noticeable. "Ma'am," Jennifer said, approaching Lisa's seat again with a more serious tone. "I've checked with our gate staff, and there seems to be some confusion about your reservation. They're asking me to verify your identity and payment method for this ticket." Lisa felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. The request felt invasive and unnecessary, especially since she had already provided her boarding pass and identification at multiple checkpoints. "I don't understand," she said quietly, trying not to wake the baby. "What kind of verification do you need?" "Well, first-class tickets are quite expensive," Jennifer explained, her voice carrying an edge that hadn't been there before. "We sometimes see issues with fraudulent bookings or stolen credit cards. I'm sure you understand our need to be careful." The businessman in the seat across the aisle set down his newspaper completely now, clearly listening to every word. Behind them, a couple in their 60s whispered to each other while glancing in Lisa's direction. The atmosphere in the cabin had shifted from mild curiosity to obvious tension. Lisa took a deep breath, trying to stay calm for Mia's sake. "My husband purchased these tickets with his corporate credit card. Everything is legitimate. I can show you my driver's license if that helps." "That would be a start," Jennifer said, extending her hand expectantly. As Lisa carefully reached for her wallet, while balancing the sleeping baby, she couldn't help but notice how differently Jennifer was treating her compared to other passengers. When the businessman had earlier asked for an extra pillow, Jennifer had been all smiles and eager assistance. When the elderly couple needed help with their carry-on bags, she had been patient and kind. Lisa handed over her driver's license, watching as Jennifer examined it closely, comparing the photo to her face multiple times. The scrutiny felt unnecessary and degrading, especially in front of so many other passengers who were clearly enjoying the drama. "This address doesn't match the billing address on the ticket reservation," Jennifer announced, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "That's because we just moved," Lisa explained patiently. "My husband updated his business address, but we haven't changed our personal documents yet. Is that really a problem?" Jennifer's expression suggested it was indeed a problem. "I'm going to need to call this into our security department. In the meantime, I think it would be best if you move to an economy seat until we can sort this out." The words hit Lisa like a physical blow. She looked around the cabin and saw that several passengers were now openly staring, some even holding up their phones as if recording the interaction. The humiliation was overwhelming, but more than that, she was genuinely confused about why this was happening. "I'm not moving anywhere," Lisa said firmly, her voice slightly louder than before. "I have a valid ticket for this seat, and I'm not doing anything wrong." The change in Lisa's tone seemed to surprise Jennifer, who had apparently expected compliance. "Ma'am, I'm trying to be reasonable here, but if you don't cooperate, I'll have to call security to remove you from the aircraft." "Call them," Lisa said, her patience finally wearing thin. "Maybe they can explain to me why I'm being treated like a criminal for sitting in a seat that I paid for." The confrontation was drawing attention from passengers throughout the first-class cabin. A young woman in a business suit 2 rows back had pulled out her phone and was clearly recording. An older man by the window was shaking his head in disapproval, though it wasn't clear whether he disapproved of Lisa or Jennifer's behavior. Jennifer's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. She wasn't used to passengers challenging her authority, especially passengers she suspected didn't belong in first class. "Ma'am, your attitude is becoming disruptive to other passengers. I need you to lower your voice and cooperate with our standard security procedures." "My attitude?" Lisa repeated, incredulous. "I've been nothing but polite while you've accused me of fraud and tried to kick me out of my seat. What exactly have I done that's disruptive?" As if on cue, Mia stirred in her arms and let out a small cry. The sound seemed to fuel Jennifer's irritation even more. "The baby has been crying since you boarded," Jennifer said, her professionalism slipping. "Other passengers paid good money for a peaceful flight, and frankly, first class isn't the appropriate place for crying infants." This comment drew visible reactions from other passengers. The young woman recording on her phone gasped audibly. The businessman across the aisle looked genuinely shocked. Even the elderly couple seemed taken aback by Jennifer's bluntness. "Are you seriously suggesting that babies aren't allowed in first class?" Lisa asked, her voice rising despite her efforts to stay calm. "I'm suggesting that when there are questions about a ticket's validity and disruptive behavior, we have protocols to follow," Jennifer replied, her tone becoming more defensive. "What disruptive behavior?" Lisa demanded. "Trying to calm my baby? Asking you to explain why you're harassing me? Or refusing to give up my seat based on your suspicions?" The tension in the cabin was now thick enough to cut with a knife. Other passengers were shifting uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether to intervene or pretend they weren't witnessing the escalating conflict. That's when Jennifer made her biggest mistake. Frustrated by Lisa's refusal to back down and embarrassed by the attention the situation was receiving, Jennifer reached out and grabbed Lisa's arm. "Ma'am, I need you to come with me right now so we can resolve this issue properly." The physical contact was unexpected and forceful. Lisa, who had been adjusting her hold on the baby, was caught off guard. The sudden grab caused her to lose her balance slightly, and for a terrifying moment it looked like she might drop Mia. "Don't touch me," Lisa exclaimed, pulling her arm away and instinctively protecting her baby. "You have no right to put your hands on me." The cabin erupted in shocked murmurs and gasps. Several passengers immediately stood up, clearly alarmed by what they had just witnessed. The young woman with the phone was recording everything, her expression one of disbelief. "That's completely inappropriate," called out the businessman across the aisle. "You can't just grab passengers like that. Someone needs to call the captain," added another voice from the back of the first-class section. Jennifer realized immediately that she had crossed a serious line. Physical contact with passengers was strictly against airline policy unless there was an immediate safety threat. Her face went pale as she looked around the cabin and saw the horrified expressions of the other travelers. "I was just trying to help her," Jennifer stammered, but her words sounded weak even to her own ears. "Help her?" Lisa repeated, her voice shaking with anger and adrenaline. "By grabbing me while I'm holding my baby? What if I had dropped her?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Everyone in the cabin could imagine the terrible consequences that might have resulted from Jennifer's impulsive action. "Ma'am, I apologize if that seemed aggressive," Jennifer said, trying to backtrack. "I was just trying to guide you to a quieter area where we could discuss this privately." "By putting your hands on me without permission?" Lisa shot back. "I don't care what your intentions were, you had no right to touch me." More passengers were pulling out their phones now, and Jennifer could see that multiple people were recording the aftermath of her mistake. The situation had spiraled completely out of her control, and she knew that her job was probably in serious jeopardy. But what Jennifer didn't know was that this was only the beginning. The consequences of her actions would reach far beyond her own employment, affecting people and policies at the highest levels of Cloudwing Airlines. Lisa held Mia closer to her chest, her heart still racing from the physical confrontation. She had no idea that her husband was about to receive a phone call that would change everything for everyone involved in this terrible situation. The first-class cabin had become a scene of chaos and confusion. What started as a simple seating question had escalated into a full confrontation that no one could ignore. Passengers were on their feet, some recording with their phones, others demanding that someone in authority step in to handle the situation. "This is absolutely unacceptable," declared the businessman who had been reading his newspaper. He stood up and faced Jennifer directly. "I saw exactly what happened, and you physically grabbed this woman while she was holding a baby. That's assault." "Sir, please return to your seat," Jennifer said, her voice shaking. She was clearly rattled by how quickly things had spiraled, out of control. "This is a misunderstanding that we're trying to resolve." "Misunderstanding?" The young woman who had been recording stood up as well. "I have the whole thing on video. You accused this passenger of fraud, tried to force her out of her seat and then physically grabbed her. How is that a misunderstanding?" Lisa remained in her seat, holding Mia protectively while trying to process what had just happened. The baby had woken up from all the commotion and was starting to fuss again. Lisa felt overwhelmed by the attention, but grateful that other passengers were speaking up for her. "I want to speak to the captain," Lisa said firmly, her voice carrying above the other conversations in the cabin. "Right now." Jennifer's face had gone from red to pale in a matter of minutes. She knew that involving the captain would mean filing an incident report, which would automatically trigger a company investigation. Her years of service and previously clean record suddenly felt very fragile. "Ma'am, I really think we can work this out without involving the captain," Jennifer said desperately. "Let me call my supervisor instead. I'm sure we can find a solution that works for everyone." "No," Lisa said without hesitation. "You've accused me of fraud, tried to kick me off the plane, and then put your hands on me while I was holding my baby. This has gone way beyond your supervisor." The elderly couple that had been whispering earlier finally spoke up. "Young lady," the woman said, addressing Lisa with kindness in her voice. "We saw everything that happened. That flight attendant was completely out of line, and will be happy to give statements to anyone who needs them." Her husband nodded in agreement. 40 years of flying, and I've never seen anything like this. Someone needs to be held accountable." Jennifer realized that the entire first-class section had turned against her. Every passenger who had witnessed the incident was now ready to support Lisa's version of events. The phone recordings would provide undeniable evidence of what had occurred. "Where is the captain?" called out another passenger from the back. "We've been sitting here for 20 minutes and no one in authority has come to address this situation." As if summoned by the comment, the cabin door opened and Captain Rodriguez appeared. He was a veteran pilot with over 20 years of experience, and he immediately sensed the tension in the first-class section. His eyes quickly scanned the scene. Agitated passengers, phones recording, and a clearly distressed flight attendant. "What's going on here?" he asked in a calm but authoritative voice. Multiple passengers began speaking at once, but Captain Rodriguez raised his hand for silence. "One at a time, please, ma'am," he said, looking at Lisa. "You seem to be at the center of this. Can you tell me what happened?" Lisa took a deep breath and recounted the entire incident from the beginning. She spoke clearly and calmly, describing how Jennifer had questioned her ticket, demanded additional verification, tried to move her to economy class, and finally grabbed her arm while she was holding the baby. Captain Rodriguez listened without interruption, occasionally glancing at Jennifer, who looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. When Lisa finished her account, he turned to the other passengers. "Did anyone else witness these events?" Nearly every hand in the first-class section went up. The businessman, the young woman with the phone, the elderly couple, and several others all confirmed Lisa's version of what had happened. Some mentioned that they had recordings of the incident. "I have the whole thing on video," the young woman said, holding up her phone. From the moment the flight attendant started questioning her ticket to when she grabbed her arm, Captain Rodriguez's expression grew increasingly serious as he heard the corroborating accounts. He turned to Jennifer, who was now visibly shaking. "Is this an accurate description of what occurred?" he asked. Jennifer opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. She knew that lying would only make things worse, especially with so much video evidence. "Captain, I was just following security protocols. The passenger seemed suspicious, and when she became argumentative, I tried to de-escalate the situation." "By physically grabbing her while she held an infant?" Captain Rodriguez asked pointedly. That was an accident," Jennifer stammered. "I was just trying to guide her to a quieter area to talk." "Without her consent, and after she had repeatedly told you she had done nothing wrong?" the captain continued. Jennifer had no good answer. She looked around the cabin at the faces staring back at her, some angry, some disappointed, all clearly against her. Captain Rodriguez made his decision quickly. "Ms. Walsh, you're relieved of duty for the remainder of this flight. Please gather your personal items and report to the gate supervisor immediately." "Captain, please," Jennifer began, but he held up his hand. "This is not a discussion. You'll be escorted off the aircraft and there will be a full investigation into this incident." As Jennifer gathered her things with trembling hands, Captain Rodriguez turned back to Lisa. "Ma'am, on behalf of Cloudwing Airlines, I sincerely apologize for what you've experienced today. This behavior is completely unacceptable and does not represent our company values." Lisa nodded but remained focused on her main concern. "I want to make sure there's a proper record of what happened, and I want to speak with my husband before this flight takes off." "Of course," Captain Rodriguez replied. "We'll need to file an incident report anyway, which means we'll be delayed while airport security comes aboard to take statements. You'll have plenty of time to make any calls you need." As if on cue, airport security officers appeared at the cabin door. Captain Rodriguez briefed them quickly on the situation, and they began the process of interviewing passengers and reviewing the video evidence. Lisa finally felt comfortable enough to reach for her phone. Her hands were still shaking slightly from the adrenaline, but she managed to dial her husband's number. It went straight to voicemail. He was probably in his meeting and had his phone silenced. She tried again, hoping he would see the repeated calls and step out to answer. This time, after several rings, she heard his familiar voice. "Lisa, is everything okay? Aren't you supposed to be on the plane?" "David," she said, her voice breaking slightly with relief at hearing him. "Something terrible happened on the flight. A flight attendant accused me of fraud and then grabbed me while I was holding Mia." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. "What do you mean grabbed you? Are you both okay?" "We're fine. But David, this was on one of your planes. It was a Cloudwing flight." Another pause. Longer this time. Lisa could almost hear the gears turning in her husband's mind as he processed the implications of what she was telling him. "Where are you now?" he asked, his voice taking on a different tone, sharper, more focused. "Still on the plane. They've called security, and they're taking statements from passengers. The captain removed the flight attendant, but David? This is really serious. People were recording everything." "I'll be there in an hour," David said without hesitation. "Don't sign anything or agree to anything until I arrive." "And Lisa?" "Yes?" "I'm sorry this happened to you. We're going to make sure it never happens to anyone else." As Lisa ended the call, she noticed that some of the other passengers were watching her with curious expressions. Her mention of your planes had caught the attention of several people, though most probably assumed she meant David worked for the airline in some capacity. What they didn't realize was that David Chen wasn't just an employee of Cloudwing Airlines. He was the founder and CEO of the company, and his wife had just been assaulted by one of his own flight attendants. The security officers continued their interviews, taking detailed statements from each passenger who had witnessed the incident. The young woman with the video shared her recording, which clearly showed every moment of the confrontation. As word spread through the aircraft about the incident in first class, passengers in economy began to murmur among themselves. Some pulled out their phones to check social media, where early posts about the incident were already starting to appear. Lisa sat quietly in her seat, rocking Mia gently and trying to process everything that had happened. She had experienced discrimination before, but never anything so blatant and aggressive. The fact that it had occurred on her husband's airline made it even more painful and complicated. She had no idea that within the next few hours, this incident would become national news, sparking conversations about bias in air travel and leading to significant changes in how airlines train their employees. For now, though, she just wanted to hold her baby and wait for her husband to arrive. The confrontation was over, but the real consequences were just beginning. The airport security investigation took nearly 2 hours. During that time, passengers shared their videos, gave detailed statements, and expressed their outrage about what they had witnessed. The incident report grew thicker with each testimony, painting a clear picture of discrimination and inappropriate conduct. Lisa remained in her seat throughout the process, declining the gate agent's offer to move to the airport lounge. She wanted to stay exactly where the incident had occurred, partly out of principle and partly because she was waiting for David to arrive. Mia had settled down and was napping peacefully, unaware of the storm of controversy swirling around them. The first sign that something bigger was happening came when several airport executives arrived at the gate. They huddled with Captain Rodriguez and the head of airport security, speaking in low, urgent tones. Other passengers noticed the increased activity and began speculating about what was going on. "This must be a really big deal," commented the businessman who had stood up for Lisa earlier. "I've never seen this many officials respond to a single incident." The young woman who had recorded the confrontation was busy on her phone, uploading the video to various social media platforms. "This is already going viral," she announced to nearby passengers. "People are really angry about what happened." Meanwhile, in downtown Miami, David Chen was wrapping up his meeting with a major investment firm. As the CEO of Cloudwing Airlines, he had been presenting the company's expansion plans for the next 5 years. The meeting had gone well, but his mind was focused entirely on getting to his wife. David had built Cloudwing from a small regional carrier into one of the most respected airlines in the country. He had always prided himself on the company's commitment to customer service and treating all passengers with dignity and respect. The idea that one of his employees had treated his own wife this way was both personally devastating and professionally alarming. He canceled his remaining meetings for the day and headed straight to the airport, calling his legal team and chief operations officer on the way. By the time he arrived at the terminal, word had already reached Cloudwing's corporate headquarters that there had been a serious incident involving a passenger and a flight attendant. Back on the plane, the security investigation was wrapping up. The lead investigator approached Lisa with a thick folder of statements and evidence. "Ma'am, we have everything we need for our report. he said professionally. Based on the witness testimonies and video evidence, it's clear that the flight attendant violated multiple policies and potentially committed assault. We'll be forwarding this to the proper authorities for review. Lisa nodded, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. What happens next? That depends partly on whether you want to press charges, the investigator explained. But regardless of your decision, the airline will conduct its own internal investigation and disciplinary process. As the security team prepared to leave the aircraft, there was a commotion at the gate. Several airport officials could be seen through the windows, along with what appeared to be news crews setting up cameras. The story was spreading faster than anyone had anticipated. Looks like this is becoming quite the media circus, observed the elderly gentleman who had supported Lisa throughout the ordeal. That's when David Chen arrived. He walked through the gate area with the confidence and authority of someone who belonged there, flanked by 2 airline executives and followed by a team of lawyers. Airport staff immediately recognized him and began clearing a path toward the aircraft. "Who is that?" asked one of the passengers still on the plane, watching through the window as the group approached. "I'm not sure," replied another. "But he looks important. Those executives are treating him like he owns the place." When David boarded the aircraft, the remaining passengers and crew members immediately sensed that the dynamics had shifted. Captain Rodriguez, who had been briefing the gate supervisor, looked up and his expression changed instantly. "Mr. Chen," the captain said, straightening up noticeably, "I wasn't expecting you to respond personally to this incident." Several passengers overheard the name and began putting pieces together. Chen was the same last name as the passenger who had been mistreated. The respectful way the captain was speaking suggested this man held significant authority within the airline. David's eyes swept the first-class cabin until they found Lisa. He walked directly to her seat, and the relief on her face was obvious to everyone watching. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, sitting down in the empty seat next to her and gently touching Mia's head. "We're fine," Lisa replied, though her voice still carried the stress of the past few hours. "But David, it was awful. She treated me like a criminal, and in front of all these people." The passengers who had supported Lisa throughout the incident were now staring with growing realization. The businessman leaned forward slightly, trying to hear the conversation. The young woman with the video looked back and forth between Lisa and David, clearly trying to understand their relationship. David turned to address the other passengers in first class. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to personally apologize for what you witnessed today. My name is David Chen and I'm the CEO of Cloudwing Airlines. The behavior you saw from our employee was completely unacceptable and goes against everything our company stands for." The cabin fell silent. Several passengers' mouths dropped open as they realized they had been witnessing the airline CEO's wife being mistreated by his own employee. "Oh my God," whispered the young woman with the video. "She's married to the CEO." The businessman who had stood up for Lisa shook his head in disbelief. That flight attendant had no idea who she was messing with. David continued speaking to the passengers. "I want to thank those of you who stood up for my wife and daughter today. Your actions showed real character and decency. I also want you to know that we will be conducting a thorough investigation of this incident and implementing changes to ensure it never happens again." Captain Rodriguez approached David respectfully. "Sir, we have all the statements and evidence compiled. The security team has completed their investigation and we're ready to proceed however you'd like." "Thank you, Captain," David replied. "I'll want to review everything personally, but first I need to make sure my family is taken care of." The news crews outside had multiplied, and airport officials were working to manage the growing crowd of reporters and cameras. Word had spread quickly through social media that the CEO of a major airline was personally responding to an incident involving discrimination against his own family. David's phone buzzed constantly with calls from corporate executives, board members, and media outlets. His assistant had already issued a brief statement acknowledging that an incident had occurred and promising a full investigation. "Sir," one of the lawyers who had accompanied David leaned in to speak quietly. "The media attention is intensifying rapidly. We should probably consider how we want to handle the public response. David looked at Lisa, who was listening to the conversation while holding Mia. What do you want to do? He asked her. This is going to be a big story regardless, but we can control how much we participate in the coverage. Lisa thought for a moment, looking around at the passengers who had supported her. I think we need to speak out, she said finally. If this happened to me, imagine how many other people it happens to who don't have your platform to fight back. The businessman nodded approvingly. She's right. This kind of discrimination happens more often than people realize. Maybe some good can come from this terrible situation. David squeezed Lisa's hand. Then we'll face this together. But first, let's get you and Mia home safely. As they prepared to leave the aircraft, the full scope of what had happened was beginning to sink in. Jennifer Walsh, the flight attendant who had started this whole incident, was likely watching the news coverage from her hotel room, realizing that she had just assaulted the wife of the CEO of her own airline. The other passengers began gathering, their belongings, many of them still processing the dramatic turn of events. Several approached Lisa and David to offer their support and express their admiration for how Lisa had handled such a difficult situation. You conducted yourself with incredible grace under pressure, the elderly woman told Lisa. That flight attendant should be ashamed of how she treated you. As the Chen family prepared to disembark, David turned to Captain Rodriguez one final time. Captain, I want you to know that you handled this situation exactly right. Thank you for protecting my family and upholding our company's standards. The captain nodded gratefully. It was the right thing to do, sir. I'm just sorry it happened in the first place. Outside the terminal, the media frenzy was reaching fever pitch. The story of an airline CEO's wife being discriminated against by his own employee was exactly the kind of dramatic irony that captured public attention. Social media was exploding with reactions, and the incident was already being discussed on national news programs. But for David and Lisa Chen, the most important thing was that they were together and safe. The public reckoning with discrimination in air travel was just beginning, and they were about to become the faces of a movement for change that would reshape the entire industry. The news broke nationwide within hours of the incident. Airline CEO's wife assaulted by employee dominated headlines across major networks and social media platforms. The passenger-recorded videos went viral, showing millions of viewers the exact moment when Jennifer Walsh grabbed Lisa Chen while she held her baby. David and Lisa returned home to find news vans lining their street. They had decided during the car ride from the airport that they would address the situation head-on rather than hiding from the media attention. That evening, they held a press conference from Cloudwing Airlines corporate headquarters. What happened to my wife and daughter today was unacceptable, David said, standing at a podium with Lisa beside him. But this isn't really about us. It's about the countless passengers who face discrimination while traveling, many of whom don't have the platform or resources to fight back. Lisa spoke next, her voice steady and clear. I want people to understand that this could happen to anyone. The only reason this incident is getting attention is because of who my husband is. But discrimination doesn't care about your last name or your bank account. It happens to ordinary people every single day. The questions from reporters came rapidly. How would Cloudwing respond? Would there be legal action? What changes would be implemented? David had clear answers ready. Effective immediately, Jennifer Walsh has been terminated from Cloudwing Airlines. We're also launching a comprehensive review of our hiring practices, customer service training, and company policies regarding passenger treatment. But the story was far from over. Within days, other passengers began coming forward with their own experiences of discrimination while flying with various airlines. The incident had opened a floodgate of similar stories that had previously been ignored or dismissed. Jennifer Walsh, meanwhile, was dealing with the devastating consequences of her actions. She had been arrested for assault and faced both criminal charges and a civil lawsuit from the Chen family. Her name and face were plastered across news outlets, social media, and airline industry publications. She tried to give interviews defending her actions, claiming she was just following security protocols and that the situation had been blown out of proportion, but the passenger videos spoke for themselves. showing clearly that her behavior had been motivated by bias rather than legitimate security concerns. "I never meant for things to go that far," Jennifer said in a tearful interview with a local news station. "I was just doing my job, trying to maintain order on the flight." But her explanations fell flat with the public, especially when other Cloudwing employees came forward to say that Jennifer's behavior was not representative of company training or policies. Several colleagues revealed that Jennifer had made discriminatory comments about passengers in the past, suggesting a pattern of bias that the airline had failed to address. The legal proceedings moved quickly. Jennifer pleaded guilty to assault charges and was sentenced to community service and mandatory sensitivity training. The civil lawsuit was settled out of court, with the Chen family donating the money to organizations that fight discrimination in transportation. But the real impact was happening at Cloudwing Airlines and throughout the aviation industry. David, Chen used the incident as a catalyst for sweeping changes that went far beyond simple policy updates. First, Cloudwing implemented mandatory unconscious bias training for all employees, from ground crew to executives. The training included real-world scenarios and focused specifically on the assumptions people make based on appearance, age, race, and economic status. Second, the airline established a new passenger advocacy department with a direct hotline for reporting discrimination incidents. Every complaint would be investigated by an independent team, and the results would be published publicly every quarter. Third, Cloudwing partnered with civil rights organizations to develop new industry standards for treating passengers fairly and respectfully. Other airlines facing public pressure and media scrutiny began adopting similar measures. The changes extended beyond Cloudwing. The Federal Aviation Administration launched a comprehensive study of discrimination in air travel, leading to new federal guidelines for airline employee training. Congress held hearings on passenger rights, with Lisa Chen testifying about her experience and advocating for stronger protections. "The aviation industry has to do better," Lisa told the Congressional Committee. "When someone pays for a service, they deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of what they look like or how they're dressed." The incident also sparked important conversations in communities across the country. Schools began using the story as a teaching tool for discussions about bias and discrimination. Corporate diversity programs pointed to Cloudwing's response as an example of how organizations could turn a crisis into an opportunity for positive change. Meanwhile, the passengers who had witnessed the original incident became advocates in their own right. The businessman who had stood up for Lisa, James Anderson, started speaking at corporate events about the importance of bystander intervention. The young woman who recorded the video, Taylor Rodriguez, used her social media platform to highlight other instances of discrimination and promote awareness. "I learned that day that staying silent isn't an option," Taylor said in interviews. "When you see someone being treated unfairly, you have to speak up. Your voice might be the only one they have." The elderly couple, Robert and Margaret Williams, wrote letters to other airlines describing what they had witnessed and encouraging policy changes. Their decades of travel experience gave their words particular weight with industry executives. 6 months after the incident, Cloudwing Airlines released its first quarterly report on passenger treatment. The numbers showed a dramatic decrease in discrimination complaints and a significant increase in customer satisfaction scores. Other airlines reported similar improvements as they implemented their own bias training programs. Jennifer Walsh struggled to rebuild her life after the incident. She was blacklisted from working in the airline industry and had difficulty finding employment in customer service roles. She eventually found work in a different field and used her experience to become an advocate against workplace discrimination. In a surprising turn of events, Jennifer reached out to Lisa Chen a year after the incident to offer a sincere apology. They met privately, and Jennifer took full responsibility for her actions and their consequences. "I let my assumptions and prejudices control my behavior," Jennifer admitted during their meeting. "I'm deeply sorry for what I put you and your family through. I've spent this year trying to understand how I could have acted so poorly." Lisa accepted the apology graciously. "I hope you can use this experience to help other people recognize their own biases before they hurt someone else." The incident, continued to have ripple effects throughout the aviation industry and beyond. Business schools began teaching case studies about Cloudwing's response to the crisis. Airlines around the world adopted similar policies and training programs. Most importantly, the culture of air travel began to shift. Passengers became more aware of discrimination and more willing to speak up when they witnessed unfair treatment. Flight attendants and gate agents received better training and clearer guidelines about appropriate behavior. David and Lisa Chen used their platform to continue advocating for fair treatment in all areas of life, not just air travel. They established a foundation focused on fighting discrimination and supporting victims of bias-motivated incidents. "Our daughter Mia was just a baby when this happened," Lisa reflected in an interview on the first anniversary of the incident. "But someday I'll tell her this story, and I want her to understand that even when people treat you unfairly, you have the power to create positive change." The incident that began with a simple question about a seat assignment had grown into a movement that changed policies, attitudes, and behaviors throughout the transportation industry. It proved that individual actions, both negative and positive, could have far-reaching consequences that extend well beyond the original situation. Years later, when David Chen retired as CEO of Cloudwing Airlines, industry analysts credited the company's response to the discrimination incident as a turning point that transformed not just the airline, but the entire industry's approach to customer service and fair treatment. The story became a powerful reminder that dignity and respect should be universal values, and that everyone has a role to play in creating a more just and equitable society. From a moment of prejudice and conflict came lasting change that made air travel better for millions of passengers around the world.